Well, welcome again, everybody. Most people seem to have joined now. So, with that, I'll hand over to my colleague, Rob Ward, who's going to tell us about getting started with the National Survey recording tools.
Thanks, John. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right and also see my screen. So just before we get stuck in, a couple of reminders that we are recording this event, so we'll be available hopefully via YouTube and we'll also email it around after we've had some time to tidy it up. Any questions you have, please post them in the chat. There'll be time at the end for question and answer, and my colleague John will be keeping an eye on that. And you can keep your microphones turned off as well. That'd be fantastic. So today we're going to be looking at how to get started with the National Amphibian Survey and National Reptile Survey recording tools. And hopefully you're joining the session because you are either interested in taking part in some of the surveys that we run as part of our National Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Program, or perhaps you're already taking part in some of these surveys. We're going to be briefly touching on what the National Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Program is, some of the surveys and projects within that, specifically focusing on the National Amphibian Survey and National Reptile Survey, how to actually get started with those surveys, the main focus on the tools to support those surveys, and then hopefully time for the Q&A. So the National Amphibian and Reptile Monitoring Program is our portfolio of different surveys and projects designed to generate data on the conservation status of our native reptiles and amphibians at a range of spatial scales. You can find more about it at this web address here. And we've got opportunities for people with different levels of experience, training, time availability, different parts of the country, and so on. And some of you may have heard of the National Amphibian Reptile Recording Scheme, or NARS as it was called, and the National Monitoring Program now supersedes that. The National Monitoring Program includes both national and regional projects. So national projects include things like Garden Dragon Watch, which is an entry-level survey just designed to encourage people to go out in their gardens and spend 5 or 10 minutes looking to see what they've got and recording those. But what we're going to focus more on today is the more structured or semi-structured surveys, such as the National Amphibian Survey and National Reptile Survey, where we ask people to go out and do repeated visits following a stricter methodology. We also have a number of regional projects, and as the name suggests, these often run at a kind of local or regional level. But the thing to highlight is that these are actually generating data that contribute to those national scale surveys as well. So if you are participating in one of our regional projects, then rest assured you're also actually contributing to the national picture at the same time. The regional projects often encompass some other elements as well, such as education, habitat management, and so on. And more information about all those different surveys and projects on the ARC Survey Hub, which we'll be looking at shortly. I wanted to give you a very quick overview of what the National Amphibian Survey and National Reptile Survey entail, just in case some of you aren't aware. You can find out more about the Amphibian Survey at this web address here. Basically, both the National Amphibian Survey and the National Reptile Survey focus on the trends, abundance, and distribution of those target species groups. So obviously for the Amphibian Survey, that's frogs, toads, and newts. They both work with a network of sites whereby we're asking people to go out and visit those sites repeatedly within a season, within a year, and ideally to go back in subsequent years so we can generate population trends information across those sites. So if you've been allocated a site, we'd ask you to go to that site multiple times within that year. Then if you're able to return to that site in future years as well. And these surveys build on the widespread amphibian or reptile survey, the widespread reptile elements of the National Amphibian and Reptile Recording Scheme. Now, I don't have time to go into full detail of the protocols today, but that can all be found on the website. But just to give a very quick summary, so the National Amphibian Survey has kind of two elements to it. It has the frog and toad survey and the newt survey, and you can opt in to do either both of them, which is what most people do, or you can opt to just do one or the other. And for the frog and toad survey, we ask you to try and aim for 4 visits between January and March using visual searches, so just going out and looking during the daytime, and then also visiting at night time with a torch to have a look, recording all life stages. And you'll need some sort of level of experience or ability to identify the species that you're surveying and understand how to record them. So you may have attended previous training that we've run, which hopefully will help you to identify the species and understand their ecology. We do have training materials on our website as well. And then today's session will hopefully get you a step further towards being more confident in recording those observations. The second element was the Newt survey. So again, this is 4 visits, this time between April and May. I should say these are suggested time periods because we know the activity of these species varies by where you are in the country, what the weather's doing, all sorts of things. The only difference here is that you're using, you can also use netting. Again, recording any amphibians you come across. And the other thing to mention is that if you're doing both newt surveys and frog and toad surveys, then we would ask you to do 6 visits across that entire period. So roughly from January to May, rather than having to do 4 for each. So 6 in total rather than 8 in total. The National Reptile Survey, very similar in terms of aiming to understand the trends, abundance and distribution of those species. Again, a network of repeated sites with repeat visits and building on and replacing the widespread reptile element of the National Amphibian and Reptile Recording Scheme. And in brief, what we ask is for surveyors to go out and try and achieve 6 visits throughout the year between March and October, to use visual searches, so just walking along your survey route and looking for reptiles. And then if you are able to use them or have them available, to also use artificial cover objects or refugia. Record all the reptiles you find. And again, obviously, you need to be able to identify those species and record your sightings. I now want to take you through step by step the kind of journey of actually participating in these surveys. Some of you may already be part way or all the way through this journey, but I just want to highlight this for anyone who might be watching this perhaps right at the start. So first of all, you can find public information about all the surveys at this web address here, arctrust.org/monitoring. If you're then, if you found a survey or a project that interests you, next step would be to register with us. So we do have a link to the registration form on all the web pages, and that's this web address here. You'll see a form a bit like this on the right-hand side. After you've registered, you'll receive a welcome email from our survey coordinator team. Please take some time to thoroughly read and digest that because it has lots of information. And there'll be a link to confirm your commitment and site suggestions if you have selected the National Amphibian or National Reptile surveys. You'll then have some subsequent communication with ourselves, the survey coordinator team. So that's myself, my colleague Fenella, and my colleague Karen. And within that, we'll be making sure we've got a site agreed, making sure you've sorted out landowner permission. And then once we're ready to go, you'll receive a login, a username, and you'll be able to set up your own password. And that will give you access to additional areas of the Arc Survey Hub and additional resources to help support your surveys, record your sightings, and so on. Now, as part of the National Amphibian Survey and the National Reptile Survey, we ask you to map various elements to help us understand the survey and to carry out more detailed analyses on your survey. So for the National Reptile Survey, we ask you to map your survey site, any survey areas within that, your survey routes, so the route you walk along during your survey, and any artificial cover objects. Whereas for the National Amphibian Survey, the only things you have to record are your survey site and any water bodies or ponds that you're surveying. Then it's time to actually plan your surveys. So using the resources that I'll be showing you later on the Arc Survey Hub, things like making sure you've carried out a risk assessment to make sure you're carrying out your survey safely. And then of course you can go out and do your surveys. And again, there's resources there to support you, including maps, survey forms, and the survey protocols. It's key then you report any sightings that you make during your surveys, and then you'll be able to log in and see the results as well using the Arc Survey Hub. Just to recap on a couple of things I've mentioned there, or to emphasize them a bit further. So first of all, you do need to register, and when you do register, you'll be filling in a form, and one of the things you'll see will be a question like this. which will ask you if you want to participate in the National Amphibian Survey or National Reptile Survey. So please just select any that interest you. In terms of identifying a site to survey, we're fairly flexible in that you can either suggest a site you have an interest in, perhaps something local to you. It could even be your garden pond. Or you can ask us for a local suggestion. We do have a network of sites already mapped, or we can look at areas we think might be suitable in your area. This might also include a previously surveyed site, and these are actually a higher priority for us because it helps us to continue that longer term capture of trend information on those sites. If you already actually survey a site, but it's not already part of the National Amphibian Survey or National Reptile Survey, the survey protocols for both have been designed to be quite flexible, so we can incorporate most existing reptile and amphibian surveys. So do get in touch if that's something that might be of interest. And if you happen to be a land manager who perhaps doesn't have capacity to survey your own site, then you can provide us your site details and we can actually advertise that to our volunteer base. So again, do get in touch if that's the case. I mentioned that as part of the process, you'll receive a login, and some of the content we provide to you does require that login. So you can download some of the apps we'll be talking about today for free before you have this, but you can't actually access any of the forms or the maps until we've set you up with your user account. And when that's set up, you'll receive an email with a notification. You'll have a link which will expire after 14 days. Don't worry if you haven't had time to click that link and set up your password within 14 days. We can just reset it and send it again. And part of having that account means you agree to certain terms and conditions just to make sure we're looking after your data appropriately and you're using the system appropriately as well. So the thing we've come here today really to look at are the resources that are available to you as participants in the National Amphibian Survey or National Reptile Survey. And these can broadly be split into kind of three areas or 3 points of access. So the first is the Arc Survey Hub. That is our web area, our website with all the information. Some of that information is public. Some of it you require your login to access. Our second is a mobile app called ArcGIS Field Maps. This allows you to have access to any maps you have actually on your phone directly out in the field. You can also use that offline. We'll be looking at that in more detail shortly. And the third is ArcGIS Survey 123. This is a form-based app, which is the main tool we use for submission of data. So whether it's your wildlife sightings or perhaps recording other elements related to your survey. Again, we'll have a look in more detail at that in a moment. So first of all, to introduce the Arc Survey Hub, as I mentioned, this is part of our website. It's this web area where you can find out more information about all of our surveys and sign in and access resources specific to the surveys you're participating in. It includes things like the survey protocols, health and safety documents, guidance to help you get landowner permission, access to your maps, and also access to paper survey forms. And if we just have a quick look at that. So this is the live website here. So here we are on the National Reptile Survey page, for example. This is the public page, so anyone can access this. And on here, there's some basic information about the survey. There's links to the survey protocol on the left-hand side and other resources. There are some other links as well to the other projects we have running, as well as additional resources that are more generic. One that we'll come back to later is this app guidance link is very useful. That goes through more detail of how to use Survey 123 and ArcGIS Field Maps. And it also has a quick summary of what's involved in the survey and including a quick summary of the survey protocol itself. So if you want kind of a quick overview of what the surveys entail, you can find that on the public facing pages of the Arc Survey Hub. But once you do have a login, you'll also be able to access our surveyors page. So you can see this link here. It says surveyors page because I'm signed in, which you can hopefully see in the top right-hand corner. So if I click on that, it takes me through to the surveyors page. As I say, you do need to be signed in to access this. And on there, I've got access to additional resources, things like health and safety documents, so risk assessments, landowner introduction letters and forms, and various other elements. Below that, you have access to any maps that are relevant to you. So generally for our surveys, we manage access to things like our maps on a regional basis. So, for example, if you're doing a survey in North Wales, you might see the National Reptile Survey North Wales map or the National Amphibian Survey North Wales map. In this case, I've just got a couple of example training maps, which I'll show you in a moment. And then below that, you have access to view and download your survey data. So any data you submit, your wildlife sightings, will appear here. So here you can see with this account, I've logged 9 surveys and seen 36 animals potentially, 36 observations. And I have tools to view that in more detail and to download them as well using the download tools. The other thing you'll find on most of the Arc Survey Hub pages is a feedback link at the bottom. So if you do come across any issues or have suggestions for improvements, then feel free to fill in that form. That'll come through to us and we can continue to make improvements to the system. Just to give you a very quick overview of what the maps look like. And I should mention here, so here we were accessing the maps via the Arc Survey Hub, so on the internet, on a web browser. But if you're using ArcGIS Field Maps, you can normally access exactly the same maps on your mobile phone or your tablet and take them out into the field. So this is the kind of web-based view. And all of the maps have pretty much the same setup. So the things to look out for are we've got some tools, in this case on the left-hand side, to zoom in and out. We can move around the map. We can search using the search bar at the top here. And we've got some more tools up in the top right here in this black bar. So I've got my legend, which shows me what the different symbols and colors and shapes mean. I've got my layer list, so I can turn things on and off. I've got my base map tool, so I can change the base map. So in this case, just to make these sites stand out a bit more, just going to pop it onto topographic map. I've got a bookmark tool, which allows me to go to saved bookmarks in terms of locations, or I can add my own. We'll use that in a moment. And we've also got a print tool as well, which allows me to print out my map if I want to print it out, either to plan my survey or take it with me perhaps in the field. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this bookmark tool to jump to a pre-saved site, in this case training site 1, and it will zoom me straight down to that site. I'm now going to change my base map back actually to that aerial imagery. That's my preferred base map. And what I've got here is a series of layers that have been set up on the map. So on the reptile survey, I mentioned earlier that things we ask you to provide are your sites. So that's this boundary here in this case, a survey area. In this case, this is this orange boundary. A survey route, which is this blue dotted line. So we know roughly where you're carrying out your survey. We can see these orange squares here, which are our artificial cover objects as well. And I can control how those appear in my map by going to my layer list in the top and turning some of them on or off so I can hide things or change their visibility, their transparency, all sorts of things. So you can customize the map to kind of show you what you need at that time. So if it's too cluttered or you're not seeing what you want, just check if it's in the layer list or not. There's also some other interactivity with this map in terms of you can click on the layers and interact with them. So if I click on the site boundary here, it comes up with some information about the site and also some orange buttons which do things, and I'll come back to what those do later. Okay, so let's switch back to our presentation. Sorry. Sorry, there we go. So next we're going to look at ArcGIS Field Maps. And this is our mobile app, which I mentioned can be used on phones, tablets, can be used offline. It's free to install. You do need to actually download it from your app provider, so Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. We've got more resources online about how to install this and get started, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But we do have videos on our website and on our YouTube channel on how to do that. The key things are, though, once you've got it installed, you can then sign in with your user account. You should then see any maps we provided you access to. So, for example, if I signed in with that same training account, I would see that same training map I just opened. And then you can also download offline areas, which I'll go into more detail in a moment of how to do that. And the offline areas are really useful because when you're out in the field, You might be somewhere remote with poor signal. You might be using a device that doesn't have data connection, perhaps a tablet with no SIM card, or you just perhaps don't want to use your mobile data whilst out in the field because it might cost you money. So you can download offline areas and use them completely offline without data connection. So you just choose the area that you want to use offline, as we'll see in a moment. To give you a taste of what field maps looks like, so this is an example from my phone. When you first sign in, you'll see a list of maps you have access to. So in this case, I'm signed in with my training account, so I can see I've got access to the National Amphibian Survey and National Reptile Survey training maps. You would see your relevant regional map normally. I can click on one of those maps and it will open that map. As we saw on the web browser, it looks pretty much identical on your phone or your tablet, obviously just on a smaller screen. You have nearly all of the same controls to be able to change the base map, to change the layers, to move around. The key differences are that you don't have a print functionality. Obviously, your phone's generally not connected to a printer. You can, of course, screenshot the map though. The other functionality though is that you will see your location. So this is where field maps is quite useful in that you can see where you are on the map. You'll see a blue dot as you move around the map, and you can see where all the other features are on your site. So for example, this happens quite a lot. You might be doing a reptile survey on a site you're not particularly familiar with. You've forgotten where one of the artificial cover objects is. You can see where you are, you can see where the object is, and you can kind of move towards it. And there is even a built-in compass tool to help you to navigate to these things as well. And again, you still have all that interactivity, be able to click on the layers, see the information about them too. So if I clicked on the site, we'd see exactly the same pop-up as we saw on the web browser a moment ago. So we get that same bit of information about the site and those same orange buttons. And those orange buttons, when clicked, will open up the relevant Survey 123 form to start filling information related to survey or some other data collection at that site. And we'll demonstrate that properly later. And as I mentioned, there's also these other tools, such as the compass tool, to allow you to navigate to things that are mapped in field maps. I mentioned offline areas, and to do that, what you need to do is to go back to your maps page. So if you're already in your map, I'll just scroll up a couple of slides. In the top of the map, you'll see this left arrow in the top left. That'll take you back to your maps list. So if you're ever stuck on your map, just click on that back arrow. That'll take you back to your maps pane. When you are on your maps pane, if you want to take an area offline, you just click on the three dots next to it, as you can see here, and you'll see the option to add offline area. What you do then is you put this rectangle over the area you want to take offline, so over your site, and then you press download area. And then it will take a few minutes to download, as you can see here. Occasionally it does fail, but normally first or second try it will work. So if it does fail, just try again. And then once it's downloaded, you'll see the area downloaded. It will show you how much storage space it's taking. So in this case, it's 141 megabytes. And you can rename that as well. So I've renamed it to training site 1, just so I know what that offline area is for that particular site. A couple of things to be aware of if you are using offline areas. So obviously, once you've got it offline, you can use that area without any data connection at all. But occasionally we make updates to the maps, or you might have made an update to the map by mapping, I don't know, some new artificial cover objects or a new pond, for example. So if you've got an offline area, if you click the three dots next to it, you should see a sync or reload button that will, whilst you've got internet connection, that will kind of update it based on what's online. So it's important to do that if you think there's been any updates recently, just to make sure your offline version of the map is completely up to date. The other app I mentioned is called ArcGIS Survey 123. Now this app, again, is free to install. It can be downloaded to a mobile device, such as a phone or a tablet, or you can also download it to a computer as well. So that's the key difference here. You can also use this on a computer. It functions exactly the same on a mobile device or a computer. You do need to install it to use it. Again, you need to sign in to access the relevant pieces of material we're sharing to you. Once you've signed in and opened the app, you'll then need to download any relevant forms. And then before doing surveys, we recommend checking your forms are up to date because we do update them quite regularly. So this is what the Survey 123 screen looks like when you've opened it. I've signed in and I can see any forms I've already got downloaded. So for example, I can see I've got the National Reptile Survey form downloaded and the Amphibian Survey form. But when you first install the app and open it, this will be blank. You might just see a big download surveys button at the bottom. And in fact, I will open up, I've got the actual app open here. So this is what it looks like. This is in real time. And so you can see the various forms I've got downloaded. If I want to download any other survey forms I haven't already got, or I want to update these forms, what I do is I click on in the top right hand corner. You can see it's a little bit, the ARC logo is actually there, but you might see your initials instead when you're signed in. You click on that and I get the option to download surveys. So I click on that download surveys button and it will see which survey forms I have access to and it will show you a list. Now, in this case, I've already downloaded all of these. So it's giving me the option to update them, showing this kind of refresh symbol. But if you haven't downloaded the form before, what you'll see is a little cloud icon with a downwards arrow to suggest you can download it. So the first time you have access to a form, you'll see a little download button. You click on that and you're able to download it to your device. In my case, I can just do some updates instead. So I can click on download updates here. And you do need to do these updates whilst you've got an internet connection, because it is connecting to the internet to do that. Once you've got the forms installed though, pretty much everything else can be done offline. So again, if you're using this app on your phone or your tablet, then you can use the form without data connection for the most part. So if I just go back to my presentation. And this is just showing what I just did there. So you click on your icon or your initials in the top right-hand corner of the screen. You click on the download surveys option, and then you'll see the option to download or update any surveys you have access to. Okay. The next step then is actually to use one of the forms. So for example, the National Reptile Survey form is the form we use for doing the National Reptile Survey, i.e. going out and collecting data. And all you do is you just click on that form in your screen. So if I do that here, if I click on the National Reptile Survey form, it will show me some more information about that form and show me a few options with various buttons. So when that opens, these various buttons have different functions. So the blue collect button, that means collect data. So that's start collecting information. So at the start of a survey, for example, you might click that collect button. The other ones you might see are the inbox. That gives you the ability to connect to our database and download any surveys you've previously submitted. You have to go through a refresh process to do that. It doesn't happen automatically. So if you need to kind of look at what you submitted in the past, you can use your inbox. You might also see the drafts box, which allows you to look at any surveys you've started but haven't yet finished. And the other one you might see is your outbox. So any surveys you've finished but you haven't yet submitted. And the typical time at which that occurs is perhaps you've filled out a survey form out in the field when you haven't got a good internet connection. You've saved it to your outbox when you finish the survey form and you wait till you're at home or wherever else with good internet connection, and then you send that from your outbox. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. So we have various Survey 123 forms that do different things. And earlier I mentioned about the need to kind of map various elements of your sites and your setup. And we have forms that do each of these. So first of all, to add your sites, we have a form, the site recording form, or the ARC site recording form, which you should have access to when we get you set up. And that allows you to map your site. In terms of the actual mapping process, it's very straightforward. It's a bit like playing dot to dot. You simply just, when we get there in a second, just filling out some information on the survey, in this case, National Reptile Survey. Just wait for this to play through. So I'm now going to actually draw on the map my site boundary, or approximately the site I'm serving. Doesn't have to be perfect. And it's just a case of sort of doing dot to dot around the boundary of the area that I'm surveying. Once I'm happy with that, I'll click on the tick button in the bottom right-hand corner to accept that, and that'll be saved into my form. I simply finish filling in the rest of the form, and then once the entire form is complete, I click on the tick button in the bottom right-hand corner in that orange bar, and I'll get some options to send that information through to the ARC system. And once that's submitted, it will be live in our system. And there we go. So if I click that send now button, that would update in our database. All of the forms that we're talking about today have the same kind of appearance and setup. They all have the same functionality. And things like any questions you see with a red asterisk next to them, that means that question has to be answered before you can submit the form. So you can see their site location has a red asterisk next to it. Let's just show you another couple of examples. Another couple of examples here, and maybe jump. So, to add site features, and when by site features I mean anything that can be represented as a point, a line, or a shape. So, the priority site features to map are your ponds or artificial cover objects, but you can also use this form to map anything else, such as parking locations, access points, benches, signs, areas to avoid, perhaps maybe boggy ground. You can map all of that using this if you want to. So you can customize the map how you would like. But the key things are those features we mentioned earlier. So again, the form allows you to add information about those features. In this case, we're adding an artificial cover object, adding some details about it, and you can add multiple features in one go as well. The bonus of using Survey 123 in the field rather than on your computer is that it means you can use your GPS on your device. So if you're walking around adding artificial cover objects on your reptile survey site, you can use your GPS as you go. So you can just record your location. You don't have to write down coordinates or anything like that to remember where it was placed. And then the third one I wanted to show you is to add survey routes. So again, same kind of thing. We've got a form just specifically for that. And we're just going to sort of play dot to dot again to draw our route. So approximately drawing the line where we are planning to walk for our survey. And once we're happy, we click on the bottom right hand icon, the kind of tick symbol to accept that. And then that will be ready to send when we're happy to. Now, with all of these things we've talked about mapping, your sites, your routes, your features, please do have a go at trying to do it through the form. But if you get stuck, then feel free to get in touch with us. There's the email address there. You'll see that a few times through this presentation. We can help you map these if need be, or you can even send us a list of coordinates for your cover objects or a drawing of roughly where your site is. All those kinds of things we can help you with. So do have a go yourself because it will save us, trying to do it for several hundred people. But if you do get stuck, don't worry. Just get in touch with us and we can help you get there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we are going to do a run through of doing a survey. Okay, so we're going to do a reptile survey, and then we're going to do an amphibian survey. So really to go step by step of how to actually fill in the survey information itself. So if you will, hopefully it's a little bit sunny where you are, like it is here today. Not so much rain as it has been the last few days, and actually decent weather for a reptile survey. And we're just about to go and do our reptile survey. So before we go and do that, first of all, have I got all the apps and things installed that I need and they're all set up? So firstly, ArcGIS Survey 123, that's a form-based app. Is it on my mobile device if I want to use it in the field, or is it on my computer if I want to fill in the information back when I get home? Have I signed in? Have I got the National Reptile Survey form downloaded in the app? And have I checked for any updates to the form before I go out? Those are the kind of the key things to ask yourself. For field maps, is it on my device? Have I signed in? Have I downloaded an offline area if I want to use one? Now, all these apps and things, they are there to support your surveys. They are optional. You don't have to use them. If you'd rather go out with a notebook and a piece of paper or a paper form, that's absolutely fine. These are just there to help you support you, and you can either capture the data in the field or record it back in your computer at home. So we're just going through kind of what you would do if you were using these in the field, but it's not essential. As long as the data comes in, that's the key thing. And if you were accessing that same map to print, for example, you'd simply go through to that surveyors page we looked at earlier, access your map and look at it and print it from there. So assuming we've got our apps installed, signed in, etc. If we are using our Field Maps app to view the map whilst we're out in the field, we need to open the app, sign in, go to that list of maps, find the map we want to use. So in this case, the National Reptile Survey training map. I'm going to use my bookmarks tool to jump to the particular site. So I'm going to go to training site 1, just to save myself zooming around the map to find my site. I'm going to turn any layers off that I don't want, make sure the base map is the one that I like. And I'm going to click on my sites layer, so the site that I'm surveying, and I'm going to see a pop-up like this and a big orange button saying Start Reptile Survey. That's the button I want. So let's have a look at what that looks like in real life. So here is my map. This is training site 1. And this would work exactly the same if you were doing it on your phone or your tablet. The difference is that I just don't see my GPS as a position on here because I'm on my computer. So I'm clicking on here and we will get a pop-up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this button that says Start Reptile Survey. Now you don't have to do this way, but the reason I'm showing this is because it saves you a couple of steps. Because as soon as I press this orange button that says Start Reptile Survey, it's going to tell my computer, or if I was doing it on my phone or my tablet, I'm going to tell that device to open up the Survey 123 app on that device. It's going to tell it to open up the National Reptile Survey form in that Survey 123 app, and it's going to tell it which site I'm surveying. So it's going to save me a few steps. So I'll demonstrate that now. So I'm going to click on here. On my computer, it'll ask me just to confirm. It's going to open up Survey 123. It'll take a moment just because we're optimizing the survey. It's always a bit slower as well over Zoom. And just while this loads, let's say the first time you open it after an update, you'll see this optimizing survey notification. This is another reason it's good to open and update your form before you go out in the field, just to save you a few seconds waiting for the updates. And then once this loads, what we'll see is the National Reptile Survey form with lots of details already filled in for me. So it saves me a bit of time. So here we go. So this is the National Reptile Survey form. This is probably the form, if you're doing the reptile survey, that you'll spend most of the time filling in, because you only have to do things like your site details once, for example. And it's broken down into 3 pages. So at the bottom, can you see it says 1 of 3? I can move through those pages using the arrows at the bottom, or just by clicking on the bar and choosing which page I want to be on. Nearly all the forms you'll see have these orange bars, which you can collapse just to tidy up your screen if it's getting a bit messy. So these are your kind of groups, if you like. And as I mentioned earlier, anything with a red asterisk next to it has to be completed to be able to submit any forms. So by going from the map and clicking Start Reptile Survey, it's filled in this page for me. So page 1 is already done. It knows what survey I'm doing. It knows who I am because I'm logged in. So you would see your name here. It knows what site I'm doing, and it shows me the location of the site. And by default, it shows me the current date and time as well. So the thing to highlight here is if you're doing this on your computer after a survey, just make sure you adjust that to the correct date and time you did your survey. Otherwise, if you are using this on your phone whilst out in the field, then that should be correct. Okay, so let's actually do our survey. So just to go through those first couple of steps again. Bear with me while this loads. All right, there we go. So here I am at my survey site. I'm ready to go. I've got my boots on. I've got my backpack. I've got some water. I've got a notebook, or I've got my mobile app, and I'm going to start my survey. So we've clicked on the site boundary and we've clicked Start Reptile Survey. It's opened up the survey form for us and filled in that first page. And we're just going to check that's all correct. And if it is, then we can carry on our survey. So next, we're going to go to page 2 of the form because that's where we're going to start adding some information. So I go to my survey form. I'm on page 1 of 3. I'm going to go to page 2 now. And it looks something like this. So what I see is this plus button, which I don't press yet, only when I've got something to add, an observation. So I've spotted a lizard or something. And down the bottom, it's also showing me the list of artificial cover objects that are already registered at this site. That's just a kind of little checklist there for you, so you can kind of keep tabs on what you've already visited or not during your survey. So we're on our survey site. We're going to walk along. And we've come to our first artificial cover object, this piece of tin. And underneath it, we've got an adder. So what do? Well, in our survey form, it's time to press that plus button. And you'll see by default, it grabs the current time, 11:43. So again, if you're doing this on your computer afterwards, just make sure you adjust that. And the way I found that adder was through using an artificial cover object. So I click on that. And because all of my artificial cover objects are in the database, I just simply click the one that I found it at. So I don't need to paste in any coordinates or remember where it was. The system already knows these locations for you. So this is why it's really useful to submit this information to us. I have some other options here to fill in if I want to say that maybe there are lots of ants underneath, but that's not it. That's not too important. And it will show me a map here of the location that cover object is at. So just to confirm, give that a quick check, make sure that looks all right. You can always adjust it if need be. I need to mark the precision of my record. So normally that's going to be within 5 meters, but if perhaps you couldn't remember the exact location, you can mark it something slightly less accurate. And I'm now going to enter some information about what I actually found at that location that time. So we said it was an adder. I can either scroll down this very long list, or I can simply just start typing adder and it will come up. I should note if you find something that isn't on that list, because you can record any sort of wildlife on this, there is an other option. If I just change that to other, I can choose other and then I can type in something in here instead. But let's stick with our adder for now. So this question was required. It has that red asterisk next to it. I can then add any other information I need. So perhaps it was one adult. I could say it was female. I can add photos as well, all those sorts of things. So that's the kind of essential information filled in about what I've seen. The other things to note is that below that, we have 2 bars that look like this. They've got a bin icon on the left-hand side and a plus icon on the right-hand side. This is for adding new records. So we'll demonstrate that as we go through. So this first bar, which is under the green kind of box, that's for adding any other records from the same time and location. So if you imagine we'd lifted that tin and we'd found an adder and a common lizard, I would need to press that plus button and add the details about the common lizard. I haven't got to add the time and location again. It's just adding the common lizard. If, however, which is what we're going to do now, we've walked a bit further and we're in a different place or a different time, then we use the second plus button. The other thing to note here is that because I've selected that we checked artificial cover object number 1, that's moved from this red list now up to here. So it's just kind of keeping a little eye on that for me, just so I can see what's going on. So let's do a few more minutes of walking around our site looking. And we walked a bit further and we found a common lizard basking on this tree stump. So what do? Well, I'm just going to copy the coordinates here, but obviously if you're in the field, you just use your GPS. So I'm going to log that. And the way that I do that is I click on this plus button below the yellow box. So it's a different time and a different location. Pressing on that one, it's captured the time again for me. Again, adjust that if you're on your computer. I press visual. So I've spotted it. It wasn't underneath or on top of a cover object. And this time I need to add the location because, it doesn't know. So if you're in the field on your phone, you can just press this crosshairs icon. That will use your GPS of your device. That's normally accurate. It's about 3 or 5 meters. I can't do that because I'm on my computer, but in the field, that's what you would do. Instead, I'm going to press on this square map icon, and I'm simply going to paste in my coordinates, my grid reference, and it's going to take me there. And when this map loads, we can sort of visually check it looks like it's in the right place, which it does. You can also see below it my previous record where the adder was at 11:43. So it keeps tabs of all your records so you can see as you progress all your points on this map as well. So I'm happy with that location. I press the tick button to confirm. And then again, I just fill in the details about what I saw. So common lizard. And if I want to say it was 1 adult, and then we're done with that record. So we simply just carry on doing your survey, walking along your survey route, checking any artificial cover objects, logging what you see. Now, if you're doing a reptile survey and you're checking a cover object and you don't find anything, so there's nothing at this tin, number 2, I simply add another record. plus button here, artificial cover object, number 2, and I'm just going to mark it and say no records species. Okay, so no records, and it doesn't ask me anything else about life stage or sex, understandably, because there wasn't anything there. So you continue that until you finish your survey. So let's just carry on. I'm not going to do all of these just for time. I just want to demonstrate here for you one that has multiple species. So here we've got a common lizard on top and a slow underneath. So what would we do there? Well, what we would do, this is tin number 4, is we click on the plus button. We're doing tin number 4. So choose number 4 from the list. I could just type 4 here to find it. And first of all, going to add our common lizard. And I could add some more details about that. Then below this green bar, I'm going to press this plus button. And I'm going to add my slow worm. And that was an adult female. You can tell she's full of babies. And what you can see here is it says 2 of 2. So I can scroll back and I can look at my common lizard record at that time and location, or I can have a look at my slow worm record. So I can see I've got 2 records at that time and location, and so far I've got 4 total kind of different times and locations that I've recorded things at. So we could carry on along our route. You might say that we couldn't check an artificial cover object because we found something like a bird nesting next to it, perhaps. You don't want to disturb it. And all you do in the form there is you choose your artificial cover object again. So let's just say it's number 5. I think it was number 6, but never mind. And you say not checked. And then it won't ask you any questions about what you found there. So it's still important to log any cover objects that you couldn't find or you couldn't check, because that tells us that you didn't just run out of time or you just didn't do a full survey. That allows us to analyze the data more efficiently. Some more examples here. We've got a female grass snake hiding in a stone wall. Could log that as a visual sighting. No records at this one. We've got, this is an interesting one. How you would like to record this one. You might just say slow worms and not attempt to record how many there were and make a comment saying there's lots. You might want to try and count them if you had a photo. You might even try and break them down by sex or life stage. It's up to you. The key thing is you found slow worms. So that's always a challenging one when you find lots like that. As I said, you might find non-reptile species like this baby bank vole. So you can log that using the other option. And then once you're finished, we go to page 3 of the form. So that's what we're going to do now. So I've added all my records. Let's just assume I've done everything. Obviously, that would normally take maybe 1 to 2 or maybe even 3 hours to do your survey. The last page of the form is very simple. It just asks you a few questions about the weather, what method you use. So normally that would be visual and artificial cover objects. When you finished your survey, now in this case, it's saying I've only done a 10-minute survey. Obviously, that would be a bit longer. So you just adjust that as needed. Did you record all the reptiles you found? Hopefully, yes, but mark no if you didn't. And then we finish the form. We're going to press this tick button in the bottom right-hand corner to say we've finished. If we do this, it's going to check that all of the required questions have been filled out. If you haven't, like I've missed one here, it's asking me to go back and fill this question in here. So I'm going to mark that. Then I'm going to try again. And now it'll hopefully let me submit. There we go. So it won't let you submit the form if you haven't filled in all the required questions. It will take you back to that question and show a red box around it. Right, so I've got a couple of options here. I can send the information now. What that does is it connects your computer or your mobile device and it sends that data directly into our database. So it's real time. It'll upload it straight away. That data is available to be viewed and accessed and analyzed straight away. You can press continue this survey. Perhaps you've forgotten to add a record or you want to make a change, or you can save it in your outbox. So that's what I'm going to do now. Save it in my outbox. So it's still stored on my computer, or in your case, maybe on your phone or your tablet. And now you can see my outbox appears. Once I'm back at home with good internet connection, I can go to my outbox and I can click send, and it will send everything from my outbox to the database. So that's the kind of workflow you might use if you're working offline in the field, you don't have good data connection, and you want to send it later when you're at home. That's how you would do that. Okay, let's jump into doing an amphibian survey. And in a minute, we'll look at the results from those surveys. So amphibian survey, very similar, the same kind of prep. Have you got the Survey 123 app? Have you got the field maps all sorted? Everything you need to do your survey? Are you going to be using the mobile apps in the field? Are you going to do it on the computer at home? What we do find is a lot of amphibian surveyors prefer to record on paper in the field, particularly if you're doing a nighttime survey, or perhaps you don't want to be holding an expensive phone or a tablet next to a pond. You don't want to drop it in the pond. That's understandable. So you might be working on paper and then recording it on your computer later, whatever works for you. Same steps of opening up the Field Maps app if you're using it, selecting the map that you're working with, in this case, the National Amphibian Survey training map, going to your site. And again, we can use that same approach of clicking on one of the layers and then choosing the orange button to start our survey. So here's our training site, complete with a couple of ponds that we've mapped. And let's say we're going to survey this pond down the bottom here. The difference here is I would recommend clicking on the pond and not the site. So if I click on the pond, you can see that's selected and it says training site 5, pond. And I'm going to click on start amphibian survey. So exactly the same as we did for the reptile survey. It's going to go through the same process. It's going to open up Survey 123 for me, tell it to open up the amphibian survey form. It's going to tell it the site that I'm surveying, but also it's going to tell it the pond that I'm surveying. So again, it saves me a bit of time filling out a few questions. So there we go. And as you can see, page 1 of the form again is pretty much all filled out. So it tells me which site I'm surveying at. And again, I'll just adjust the date that I'm doing my survey if I'm filling in the form on my computer rather than on my phone in the field. So let's scroll down. So making sure page 1 is complete, we're happy with that. And let's go to page 2 of the form. So if we have a look on page 2 of the form, the structure on page 2 is a little bit different to the reptile form. So it asks you if you're surveying a water body or a terrestrial habitat. So normally it's going to be a water body, your pond. It's already told it that I'm doing training pond 2, and it's shown me on the map where that pond is. So I can correct that if that's wrong. I should mention as well with all these survey forms, you can just open them without using the map. You just have to fill in more questions manually. But by doing it from the map, it just saves you a bit of time and more consistency as well. It means you're not going to type in things incorrectly. There's a few optional questions, things like what's the pond status? So we can say it's still there. We can skip this pond conditions question for now. And it asks me what survey method I'm doing. Now, the way that we structure amphibian surveys in the National Amphibian Survey is that when you go to your pond that you're surveying, you do one method at a time and you record all the observations from doing that method. So for example, you've gone to your pond and let's say we're going to do a visual search of our pond. So we're just looking in our pond, not using a net, not using a torch. So I'm going to choose visual search from my list. And then I'm simply going to add, as we did with the reptile survey, all of the observations from doing my visual search. So let's go back to our presentation. Let's see what we might find. In this case, we found some common toad tadpoles. So in my form, I'm going to search for common toad. Going to say tadpoles. And for spawn or tadpoles, it doesn't ask you for an exact number. It just asks you for an approximate number. So we're going to say somewhere between 11 and 100 because it's very hard to count tadpoles. And then if we find anything else during our visual search of this pond, we can press this plus button here to do so. So let's just see if we find anything else. In this case, I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear this frog call in the background. Perhaps not. We're going to add some water frogs. So this is a non-native species. So I'm going to click on the plus button, search for water frogs, adults. Oops. Say 10 males. And I could say that I heard them calling. And in that case, I can even upload some audio. So if you're recording some frogs calling, for example, you can even add that into the form if you like. That can help us with verification of the record as well. Okay, so let's assume that's everything we found during our visual search. So we found some toad tadpoles and we found some water frogs. And then we're going to fill in the bit below that on the form, which is the survey effort. So how long did we spend doing our visual survey? And in this case, I've only done 4 minutes. Hopefully you would spend a little bit longer. There's some questions about how much of the pond you surveyed. So did I cover the entire perimeter of it? How long was that? It's about 15 meters perhaps. And then we're done filling in everything from our visual search. If that's the only method you used on that day for your pond, you then go to page 3, a couple of questions to answer, you can submit it. If on the off chance you've stayed around, you're going to do another method, then I'll show you what to do. So to do that, we have another one of our plus bars, this time again below the yellow box. This is to add any different methods, times, or locations. So let's assume we're going to do a different method. And this time we're going to do a torchlight survey of our pond. So I choose my method. So let's press the plus button, sorry. We're back at the same pond. We're going to choose torchlight. And we're going to add our observations from doing our torchlight survey of the pond. So in this case, we found some spawning toads. So we've got both adult toads and spawn to record. So I'm going to choose common toad, adult. So there's 10. We're going to add our records for our spawn as well. So common toad again, spawn, and let's say there was 11 to 100. We could carry on filling in more and more information, but just for time, I'm going to skip ahead. So we could have added some terrestrial observations as well, perhaps some metamorph toads underneath a rock somewhere. Once we're happy we've completed the form though, going to go to page 3 as we did with the reptile form. And all we have to add here is there's just optional questions about weather and some optional questions about adding any comments. And of course, we click on the tick button in the bottom right-hand corner to confirm. Sorry, it's told me I've missed a question. Let's see what it's saying. What have I missed? Oh, here we go. I forgot to fill in this. I didn't fill in the required question about our efforts. Press the tick button. And again, I can either send now, continue, or save an outbox. This time I'll send now. So it's going to connect to our database and it will send it directly into the system. So that's all in our database. That's now in the ARC system. So the next step really is to look at our results. So let's go into, bear with me 1 second. Let me just hide this. Just go back to our surveyors page. In this case, we could either do, let's have a look at the amphibian surveyors page. It's the same setup. Just to show you that the amphibian surveyors page is basically the same as the reptile surveyors one in terms of setup. You've got the same resources. So here we go. We've got the same list of resources, the same kind of structure where the maps are. And what we wanted to look at is our survey data at the bottom. So when you've submitted data, this is the best place to come and look at it. So you go to the surveyors page, you sign in, you go to the bottom. And there what we've got is we've got a map. At the top, we've got some statistics of how many records we've submitted. And we can even have a look at the table of those records. So let's see if we've got any that's showing yet from what we submitted today. So there we go. We've got a few from today's date. If we give it a second, it catches up. It might zoom in for us. Maybe being a little bit slow because of the Zoom. No, not playing ball. Okay, but basically all the data is there on your map, and you can filter that as you like. You can look at charts, you can print it, and as I say, there's a download option there to download your records if you want to have your own copy as a spreadsheet or in another format, or perhaps you want to share it to the landowner of the site you're surveying because they might be interested in the results, of course. So we're nearly done, and then we'll time for Q&A in a moment. Last couple of bits before I finish. So a few final points, just a few reminders. So you do need a login, which will issue to you required for some of those resources. So the surveyor's page, your maps, your forms. There are paper forms available as well as digital ones, especially useful if it's your first time out in the field. You want to maybe focus more on your survey site and your survey rather than perhaps worrying about, am I using the app correctly? So paper form can always be really beneficial at that time. Just do please make sure you do record the data later on. Don't forget to map those relevant uh, pieces of your site. So your site boundary, your survey areas, your routes, artificial cover objects, your ponds. There's lots more guidance on a website of how to do that. If you get stuck, come to us. And in a moment, I'll just show you the app guidance very quickly. So I'll read through this list though before we do that. The mobile apps are there as a resource to help support your surveys. They're free to download, but you do need that login to access some of the content. It's a good idea to load any survey forms, such as your National Reptile Survey form or your Amphibian Survey form, before you go into the field. That will optimize things for you. The apps can be used offline. The site code, just to demonstrate that, when you're filling in a survey, one of the questions you'll get asked is your site code. This gets filled in when you fill in the form from your map. That is what makes sure it brings up the right list of artificial cover objects, for example. So the training site we had was TRS1. So as long as we put that code in correctly, the artificial cover objects will come up correctly. So if I do that here, TRS1, that's kind of the key one here. If I scroll to the bottom here, we see that it comes up with the right artificial cover objects. So that's having that site code correct is very important. Don't press that plus button in the form until you have a record to add, because what that will do is we'll add the wrong time potentially to your record, and it could also add the wrong location. If you do save data in your outbox, don't forget to send it. And there's lots of other guidance resources available in the Arc Survey Hub. So let's have a quick look at those. If I go to the resources drop down here and go to app guidance, this is the main one I want to show you. This has much more detailed information on how to use the apps if you get stuck, how to sign into them, how to fill in the amphibian form, how to fill in the reptile survey form. There's videos in there, all sorts of information. So that is linked on pretty much every page on the Arc Survey Hub. If we go back, and just to highlight as well, we have got the survey protocols in there in more detail. So if you're just getting started, all the survey protocols are in there. They go into a lot of detail, taking you through step by step what the surveys entail, the kind of habitats to survey in, all sorts of things on there as well. So we're now time for questions. There's various useful links there. So do take a look at the Arc Survey Hub. Do look at the relevant pages for whichever surveys you're looking to get involved with or are involved with. If you're not already registered, there's the link to register. And any issues, any questions, get in touch with us via this email address. Either myself or one of my colleagues will get back to you and hopefully resolve any issues you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. We got quite a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
Ed says, we're planning to visit our survey sites with artificial refugia more than 6 times over the season, as we've got some very engaged people. Is this useful or counterproductive?
Okay, it is useful. So for all of our surveys, we set a kind of target level of surveys. The reason we do that is because it's based on statistical analysis that basically means that if you go, for example, to a reptile survey site 6 times and you don't find a particular species, we can fairly confidently say that that species probably isn't there. For the reptile surveys, we do set an upper limit of 10 surveys. Ideally, that's just try and reduce disturbance, because if you go too much to your sites, if you're lifting cover objects too much, if you're trampling through the vegetation too much, you're going to negatively impact the wildlife there. So we say 6 is kind of a target for statistical reasons, but we would recommend no more than 10 just for disturbance, kind of, animal welfare reasons as well. So, but it is still useful. So we don't discard that data. It still gets analyzed and used.
Okay, good. Bob says, is a login different to my existing ArcGIS login that was set up under Sith?
No, we can use exactly the same login. So as long as we know what you want to participate in, we can just give you that same login access to whichever resources are required.
And Lucy's saying, will updated survey forms appear as newly available download?
So most of our survey forms, when we do issue an update, so for example, our reptile survey form updates every 24 hours to make sure that all the artificial cover objects are correct within it. You'll normally actually get prompted saying there is a download available, and you can't proceed until you've made that update. So for most of them, it forces you to do the update before you can fill in the form. So you always have the most up to date. But it is worth checking, before you go out and do a survey, just going to the download surveys button and choosing the update refresh button just to make sure. Then it's definitely correct.
Do existing sites already have the site boundary and features, etc.?
So all of the existing sites have the site boundaries. Some of our old sites were actually based on 1 kilometre squares rather than a proper site boundary. This was from our National Amphibian and Reptile Recording Scheme, where we set up a selection of sites based on these 1 kilometre squares rather than, a landowner boundary or perhaps where fence lines are and so on. So we can always adjust those to something more representative of the area you're surveying. A lot of the sites don't necessarily have the features set up. It depends on where the site information has come from. So perhaps if someone has already surveyed it, we might have that information, whereas in some cases we don't. So it does vary, but in nearly all cases we at least have the site boundary.
And what functionality do offline maps have?
Okay, in the offline maps, you still have pretty much all the functionality you have whilst you're online. So you can still change the you can't change the base map because you downloaded that specific base map with your map. So you might have downloaded it with the aerial imagery, that kind of typical map view. So if you do want different base maps available, you have to do different copies of the offline. But otherwise, be able to turn your layers on and off, be able to interact with them, to see your GPS position, all of that still works. So all the kind of key functionality. The compass will still work, everything like that.
Bob's saying, do you require negative records for each refuge? Because Ben has asked for those previously.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So that's important. It tells us that, for whatever reason you're not finding something at that location. It also tells us that you've checked that refuge, rather than just skipping it entirely. Because if you don't log that, we will assume that you haven't checked it, and that we will then assume it wasn't a complete survey, and that will affect how we analyze the data.
Lovely. Ed says, can I amend a record later? E.g., record a grass snake, take a picture, and add the sex once I've confirmed it at home.
You can, yes. So one thing to note is when you fill in a survey form, so you can either save it. One thing I didn't show you is how to save in drafts. I'll just show you that briefly. If you've got your survey form here, you can save it in drafts as well. So if you click on the X in the top left-hand corner, it'll ask me if I want to save it in my drafts. I can then reopen that form later and carry on editing it, or you can save it in your outbox and then edit it from there, or even send it and bring it back. But if you know you're going to be making edits later, it's best to save it in your drafts. The thing to highlight is that this is on the same device that you recorded it on. So if I've done this on my computer, it's not going to show up on my phone. Even if I've got the same app installed, because it's stored currently on my computer. I haven't added it to a database anyway. It's just stored there on my computer. So yes, you could save it in the drafts, come back later and add the information. We do have a means though, if you have already submitted the data, to edit it as well. I won't go into detail too much now just for time, but basically through the inbox, you can download your previously submitted data. So sorry, again, just to show that inbox, I go to my inbox in my form, I press this refresh button. It'll connect to our database, download all the surveys you've submitted for this particular survey. So here I can see all of my previous training sessions I've run over the last couple of weeks. I can go into one of these and I can edit it. So I can actually go and edit that survey. So if you want to add photos or perhaps update things like sex, you can do so through there. But I would say try and minimize that as much as possible because there's risk of making mistakes doing it through that way.
He says, what happens if you find a non-native reptile? Should this be recorded?
Yes, please. Yes, please record any native and non-native reptiles or similarly amphibians you find during your surveys. So although the surveys are designed to collect data around our native species, the information on non-natives is still really useful. We do share data from all these surveys, and yeah, that all the non-natives and native species that we're aware of should appear in the drop-down list already. So you shouldn't have to type in other and type it in manually.
And Rob's saying, I have a very large area to survey, which cannot be complete in one day. I usually split it into 3 visits and send off records from each visit. Should I use a draft save for each section visit and send it off all at once, rather than have it say that I have unsaved cover objects at the end of each section? That's a good question.
Okay, so for the National Reptile Survey, we do advise trying to set up a survey that is achievable in 2 to 3 hours maximum. Um, it sounds like with a site that large, it might be better to actually split it into separate surveys and carry out each one as a different survey unit, if you like. So you could, area A, area B, area C, for example, and actually do it that way. And we can, if it's already in our system, we can always split it down if that's what's needed to be done, rather than having to come back multiple visits because they are in effect separate surveys and the data aren't data are kind of independent, if you like. So yeah, do get in touch with us about that. If it's something we've already got in our system, we can make any adjustments there.
Beth says, what's the benefit of starting from field maps rather than just starting from survey 123?
Okay, so the benefit there is it makes sure that you open up the correct form. It makes sure that giving it the correct site code, the correct site name, the correct site location, and in the case of the amphibian form, also the correct pond information. So if I was to show you again, if we come back to our National Reptile Survey form, here's an example. If I start from scratch, and I do that by pressing the collect button rather than going from the map, it'll open up my form. Some information will be automatically filled in for me, such as who I am, because I'm signed in, it knows who I am, and the current date and time, which again, I'd need to adjust if I'm doing it on my computer. But it doesn't already know the site information, so I have to fill that in manually. So here we are. It assumes that I'm doing the National Reptile Survey. I'll come back to that in a moment because there's something I didn't mention earlier that's worth highlighting. But the site code, site name, and location is all missing. So I'd have to type in TRS1, training site 1, and I have to go into the map and find that location. So that's, a few extra steps really. So doing it from the map just saves me that hassle. And it means that you're definitely consistent. If I accidentally typed in, TRS_1 by mistake, that's going to cause an issue when you come to the next page and I don't see my artificial cover object list and they're not going to be in the drop down. One thing I didn't mention earlier as well is that the reptile form and the amphibian form both allow you also to add ad hoc or casual records. So when you open up either of those forms, if you press the cross next to the survey type, you then can select some other options. And here we have ad hoc. And this means that if you happen to have that app downloaded, you're not actually doing one of your surveys, but perhaps you're out walking your dog, you're out somewhere, and you spot something of interest, you can still open up the form, change the survey type to ad hoc, add some details. So I don't know. I live in Devon, so Coastal Park might be a place I'm likely to spot something. And I can just go through and add the records as I go. So I might just have the form loaded, open in my pocket as I walk along, and I maybe spot some common lizards somewhere as I'm walking along and add those records. So that's just another feature. It's not the kind of primary function, but if you have the app downloaded and you're using it anyway, it's a way of logging records without submitting them separately elsewhere.
Grand. Bob says, how do you amend the location of an existing cover object? For example, there's a problem with bracken where he surveys, which means they might need to move them every few meters, every few years.
Okay, yeah, so there's a common issue. Yeah, either due to vegetation encroachment or perhaps public disturbance or getting damaged by tractors, all sorts of things happen. So the first thing is to log the new positions, and you can either do that again through the form. Currently, the best way to do it is just to let us know the ones you've moved, and we will effectively hide the old positions. But we are going to be rolling out a more direct approach where you'll be able to actually edit your existing features, the ones you've submitted. So you'll be able to change the status of the old position. We call it closed. So we still like to know that it existed there in case we have any old records we need to attribute to that location. And you add the new location. So as I say, the best way to do that is go into the feature recorder form currently, add the new position, let us know the ones you've relocated, and we'll just deactivate the old ones and they'll disappear from your map and from the list. But we are working on a much better way of doing that. So hopefully that'll be available to you reasonably soon.
You, Beth asks, are you able to see other people's survey results via this survey 123 or only what you've input yourself?
Only what you've input yourself. So it works based on your user account. So we are quite careful about how we control access to various information about people's surveys and their results.
And finally, Bree's asking, what happens if European protected species are found? Are surveyors covered by our trust's EPS licenses?
That's a good question. So first of all, we do hold organisational protected species licenses for for England, Wales, and Scotland. We don't currently have one in Northern Ireland, but we do have England, Wales, and Scotland. Some of our surveyors who have been appropriately trained uh, are accredited under that license. So particularly people we know that are surveying in areas with sand lizards, smooth snakes, great crested newts, bullfrogs, natterjack toads, etc. If you are not covered by our license or any other license and you come across a protected species, you should stop that survey. You should let us know, and then we can talk about how to proceed, whether that's getting you on some training to get you accredited under our license or perhaps someone else's. Or depending on the situation, what the risk is of causing disturbance to those protected species, of causing an offence. So examples might be if you're surveying a pond that you weren't previously aware had great crested newts. That's a kind of common one. First time you come across great crested newt, stop the survey, and then we can review the situation and we can try and get you trained up and accredited. But you do have to go through training. We can't just accredit you outright just because you found something. We have to go through appropriate training. You have to understand the legislation and various things. Another scenario might be you're surveying. This is much rarer. Surveying a reptile site that has protected species of reptile on. Generally, we know sites that have smooth snakes and sand lizards on, so it's very unlikely that we would allocate you a site that has those species on without checking if you're covered by a license. There is also the risk that you might be doing a reptile survey and a great crested newt might pop up underneath an artificial cover object. It does happen occasionally. That's a bit more of a tricky scenario because you're not seeking out to find great crested newts. So again, we can have a discussion around that. But generally, we do ask you stop and we'll make sure you're accredited before you proceed again.
Bob's saying, when should you use the confidential button?
Okay, so that's a personal choice, really. I would suggest doing that firstly, if the landowner, so the person whose land you're surveying on, has asked you to treat the site as confidential. It's rare, but it does happen. So in that case, we can log those as confidential. If it's going to be lots of records, you can let us know, and we can actually put something in the system that will automatically flag them as confidential. Otherwise, though, it's not usually necessary. It's normally at the landowner's request. The most common scenario is if you're surveying someone's private pond in their garden or similar, and they don't want public knowledge they've got great crested newts, for example. That's the most common one because they're worried it's going to affect their ability to do things on their property. Otherwise, it's very rare we need to. I should highlight that we have a data sharing policy. We have a policy around how we manage data and how we control sensitivity of records. So, for example, anything that comes through any record of a protected species, a European protected species, so again, sanders, smooth snake, natterjack toad, etc., we treat that with a high level of sensitivity by default. So it doesn't need to be marked as confidential. We will only share that record under more stringent controls at a coarser resolution. So, for example, when we share it to public repositories like the National Biodiversity Network Atlas, it's at a 10-kilometer resolution. So it's very, very coarse. People can only see which 10-kilometer grid it was found in. They can't see the pinpoint detail. So unless you've got a specific reason to mark it as confidential, generally you don't need to.
And Cordelius is asking advice on choosing a survey location.
All right. This often comes down to a balance of accessibility. So what's local to you, what's within reasonable travel distance, whether you've got a car or not, all these sorts of things. Getting landowner permission, of course. So a landowner such as National Trust or local council or a wildlife trust is probably easier to approach and get information and access to rather than a completely private piece of land, which perhaps you don't know who owns it. That's another challenge. If you're just trying to find somewhere yourself, a good starting point is just to look at a map. So go on Google Maps or something similar, look at the aerial image and look for suitable habitat. So for reptile surveys, that's generally a bit easier. In the survey protocol for reptiles, we've got a whole list of suitable reptile habitats to look out for. Anything from cemeteries to, the buffer strips around parkland, those sorts of areas, through to more protected areas or heathlands and dune systems, those kinds of things. For amphibians, it can be a bit trickier because ponds aren't typically well mapped. So sometimes it requires a bit more knowledge of the local area. But again, going somewhere like a local park is a good place to start. But as I say, we already have a number of sites and areas mapped out. We can help you identify those areas, and we're reasonably good at spotting suitable habitat from images, and we can also look at past data as well, of where we know records have been submitted. We've got a large database of reptile and amphibian records, so we can help plan the survey around areas we think are likely to have species.
Thank you. And I think we'll make this the last question. Rebecca said, a bit of a weird question. There's a lane near my house where I can sometimes spot 30 frogs and 4 or 5 toads as I'm walking along. Should I use ad hoc records for this, or could I upload it as a sort of transact or site?
It sounds like there's probably a migration going on if it's along a lane. And so there is a project called Toads on Roads, which is one that we don't run. It's run by another organization. They've got a specific project designed to look at migrations of amphibians. So you could look at getting involved in that particular project. Alternatively, certainly we would like to have that information in our database. So the easiest way would be to log it as an ad hoc record. And because it is going to be quite a time limited thing, it's probably not worth setting up as a survey site as such. But happy to discuss further, with a bit more detail about the site and how frequently you're finding amphibians there. But it does sound like it's probably a migration for animals moving from overwintering or feeding locations to and from the ponds they're breeding in.
Thanks very much, Rob. And thanks very much to everybody for attending. Hopefully you've captured all the emails and web addresses that you need to join in, should you wish to. We look forward to hearing from you all and hoping that you'll take part in the national surveys. Thanks very much.
Thanks all.